Yeah, hi. Since the beginning of time, I think man has always been aware of the size of things and wanted to measure and compare various things and products. The basis of all commerce in some ways is measurement. And for this reason, we have the international system of measurement, which we actually know as the metric system. This is an international system of units that standardizes units to make sure that when you buy a kilometre of wheat in New Zealand, when you buy a kilogram of wheat in New Zealand, that it would be the same shape and size as a kilogram of wheat in any other country. So this is the basis of the metric system, is that so that we're all talking off the same page. Now the system international, or the international system, has a number of what we call base units. These are the basic drivers of the system. The ones we would be familiar with would be the meter and the kilogram, time, electric current, thermodynamic temperature. Not so familiar with the mole and the candela, obviously, more in the physics and science areas that the everyday man's not perhaps always aware of, but just these are the international system base units. Associated with the base units are the prefixes, and the prefixes are based on a decimal system or a system of tens. So here we can see here some of the ones that we would be more familiar with: the kilo, which is the 1,000 meters in the kilometre, 1,000 grams in the gram, that we particularly familiar with; the decigram and the centigram, or the decimeter and the centimeter, not such familiar terms to us here in New Zealand. However, we are familiar with the millimetre, thousandth of a metre there. The microgram and the nanogram are sort of familiar to those of us with a bit of a scientific background. And obviously then when we look in our computer things, we also have our megabytes, gigabytes and terabytes becoming more familiar. So these prefixes we are familiar with, and we are generally familiar with their size or the extent or the number of zeros that they have. So with these prefixes and our base units, we have what we are familiar with is our familiar metric unit. Now there are a number of derived units. They are derived from other units. So area, square metre, we should be familiar with that, and volume, the cubic metre. Density, kilograms per metre cubed. As engineers, you may well be familiar with that. Speed and velocity, meters per second. Of course, we all know that velocity is a vector and speed is just not a vector. So velocity as a vector, it has a distance, it has a direction, whereas speed doesn't. Velocity has a direction. When we change direction, we change velocity because the vector changes. And then we have, of course, acceleration, which is the change in velocity over the change in time, meters per second squared. All derived units that we should be relatively familiar with. Now we are all hang back to the various metric systems that we are familiar with, or were familiar with, particularly the older ones amongst us. When I went to school, yes, we definitely dealt in feet and yards and inches and miles. So I know that there is 1,760 yards in a mile. There's 12 inches in a foot, 3 feet in a yard, 22 yards in a chain, 66 feet in a chain. I became very familiar with chains as a surveyor because they were the system that we used for measuring boundaries, and there's 100 links in a chain. I'm also, as a surveyor, very familiar with the conversions that I can sort of have memorized. So 0.201168 the conversion from links to meters. 0.3048, the conversion from feet to meters, and 2.54 or 0.0254 converts inches to meters. And we can combine these in various ways to determine the other quantities. Also, in old times we had acres, roods and perches. So there was 40 perches in a rood, 4 roods in an acre. So the rood was the typical a quarter acre, 1012 square meters. If you look at old plans, you'll see there is a number where they've been converted. 1012 is the quarter acre paradise that New Zealand was deemed to be. Of course, then there's the story about the half acre, but that's 2 roods. Too rude. A joke from an oldie, and not such a goodie. So there we have our conversion factors that are very useful when we're looking at old plans. And speaking of old plans, here we have a snippet of an old plan, that an old coloured plan here, where if we look at this very carefully, we will see that the distances are shown in red and in black. The distances on this plan are links, and the 35.6, if we look at lot 13, that is in perches. 35.6, just under a quarter acre, and the distances are in links. You'll also note the bearings, which are in degrees, minutes and seconds. 360 degrees in a circle you'll be familiar with. Each degree has 60 minutes, each minute has 60 seconds, just like hours, minutes and seconds. The bearings, or the what we call the observed bearings on this plan, are in blue. The measured distances are in red. The black distances and the black bearings are calculated, and they are shown in black as being calculated. The green border indicates the lot boundary. The pink in this case is a road to be dedicated. There's an exercise following this little video here where I will ask you to draw a diagram of lot 13 up here. So just so you know, lot 13 goes from here down to here, all the way up here, around here, so on, background here like that. So I'm going to ask you to draw a plan or diagram of that lot 13 and convert the links to meters and convert the perches to square meters and draw up that diagram. Now this is a common occurrence for surveyors, where they have to interpret these so that people know the dimensions. Just some little further information about this beautiful coloured plan, which is well drafted, very clear. The red measures and observed. The iron spikes, these are new marks, iron spike V here, red new pegs, a black peg and a black iron spike there, they represent old marks, so old iron spike, DPS 7192 and so on. So I'm going to leave you there with this introduction to metrics and a little exercise there for you to do, that you can do on a piece of paper or using some sort of digital medium. Draw up a plan and dimension it in meters, converting the links to meters, and then as usual you can either scan and email it to me so that I can evaluate your work and give you some feedback if need be.